There have been mixed views on the ongoing housing crisis in the inner city of Johannesburg. Now, this, of course, as over 70 people have died in a fire that gutted a building last week. Now, some say undocumented migrants are to blame for the crisis, but others are saying that they are being used as a scapegoat for an even bigger crisis which needs urgent intervention. Let's talk about this now and speak to Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda, who's the African Diaspora Global Network CEO. Thank you so much for your time this evening. And I'm going to start with something, of course, that you've raised concern with, Dr. Sibanda, the process of identifying the bodies, the support in that particular regard. How is that going? Are things improving?
Well, to a certain extent, but obviously I think the biggest challenge is that, especially with those people that are bent beyond recognition, and particularly those that don't have relatives, where samples can be taken to try and test against them to see who these people are. So it looks like, for those, it might be very difficult to identify, who they are and where they are going. But so far, it's coming, seemingly it's coming all right. We haven't gotten to that crisis stage where completely now we're saying, we hear that, okay, there's a number that has not been claimed. It's still a bit of early days.
So how are you getting around that, though, particularly those who don't have relatives in South Africa?
Well, those that don't have relatives, and particularly that cannot be identified where they are coming from, it means that it will have to be government that probably, buries that, because now, some people, would not obviously, especially if there is only one person and that person, lived in the area, and you've got, a number of bodies that remain unidentified. So it will be very difficult who's going to claim that body to even bury it, unless, of course, it can be said that the numbers get so narrowed down that maybe you've got 5 people, that have remained unidentified, and the only people that are unidentified belong to a known country, say like Malawi or Zimbabwe. Then it is easier to then invite, the consular, services or the embassy of that particular country to, then, see how best they can deal with the burial of those people, because they have a responsibility as a government. But if it is mixed and it's unknown, and again, it could be an issue where people say, well, we don't know, but it comes up to say the only people that are missing are from this country, then it becomes the South African government's responsibility to bury them.
And I'm sure you've seen, of course, what has been, talked about since this particular incident, that, the NGOs, for example, in some of the instances, and also undocumented migrants are to blame because they're occupying these hijacked buildings. And I wonder what has been your view when you see this particular argument.
Well, look, I think it is quite interesting that at every stage, at some stage in life, people use, catastrophes and disasters like this, to try and, score political points. They look at, what would be politically correct at a particular moment in time. Now, if you look at the issue of the so-called hijacked buildings, for example, the first question that would have asked would have been the building in question, that originally was run by Usindiso, a shelter for abused women. One would then have asked the question that, but who does that building belong to? At that very moment, when the building, when Usindiso could not continue because they didn't have the finances or the funding, now the owners of the building should have taken over and noticed that, okay, this building is not suitable for human habitation. Now, if a building is not suitable for human habitation, it's not guarded by security, it's just left unattended, it obviously is going to attract, homeless people to come and dwell in. And we've got so many such buildings, in the city. And those buildings belong to somebody. If they don't belong to anyone, no one has claimed them, the city has a responsibility either to, destroy the building, get some new structures coming in. So the decay, city decay that we see, for example, in Marshalltown, has not been properly dealt with in ensuring that, because these buildings that are not inhabited, if there's no one inside, definitely you're going to have criminals staying in and hijacking and robbing people. And the majority of the people that are quite vulnerable are also these, are migrants, that are, come into the country. They don't have jobs, obviously, because they don't have documents. And if there is a building that is unattended, then they'll come in. But more so, then there's also these presumed landlords that come and take the buildings and make them theirs and then rent them out to building to exploit, these migrants and other, even native,
And Dr. Sibanda, we spoke to the city, for example, in the previous hour, we spoke to Ntatisi Mudingwan, who speaks for the city, and he says some of those who are hijacking these buildings include foreign nationals.
Look, it is at the end of the day, I'm not going to say foreign nationals are not involved. I mean, it's a crime that, if there is state and it proves that, there are foreign nationals that are involved. Well, if that is the case, then true, it is the case. But what we know is that the hijacked buildings are hijacked by a lot of people. If you just go further down from where that building is, on Durban Street, there is quite a lot of those buildings, and they house a lot of native South Africans. And when you look at the state of those buildings, and they would not be paying, to these foreign nationals as it is claimed, but they are hijacked by locals. So it's unfortunate that such human catastrophes always boils down to nationality, migrants, and what, rather than to look at the criminal aspect of it, rather than to basically say there is a gap that is creating a problem. How do we resolve it? Destroy buildings that are not suitable for human habitation, build new ones, get them guarded and protected. But the easiest way is say they are hijacked. If they are hijacked, why are they not arresting the hijackers of the buildings?